Uh, we have an honored guest here as our guest speaker, my friend Marissa Nordstrom. She is the founder of the holistic career counseling firm Your Career Concierge and is based in Corrales on the ancestral homelands of the Tiwish Pueblo people. She uses her background in communications, project management, and entrepreneurship, as well as intuitive abilities, to help you articulate your career vision, own your brand, clarify messaging, and frame a professional life based on your priorities. Marissa is an introvert who has overcome many life challenges and knows what it's like to feel stuck. She works best with people who are seeking to live more authentically, use their life for good, and ready to invest in their own transformation. Her business is centered on the values of social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and you can learn more at yourcareerconcierge.com. Marissa, the the floor is yours.
Well, I was just going to follow everybody else's example and put my thing in the chat. So I'm really happy to be here. And I did want to let everyone know kind of, I put it at the top of the chat, that if you're able to minimize your distractions as far as, muting your phone and your tabs on your computer and try to be able to focus on this time together. This is actually meant to be interactive, and it's a chance for you to focus on yourself and hopefully come away from it at the end with some helpful and useful information that you have actually worked on versus me just talking to you and telling you what to do later. I like to add value during the time that we're together. So the first question that I wanted to have you put something in the chat is, what kind of feelings come up in you when someone asks you, what do you do? So you can put that in the chat. So if you imagine, you're at a party or a networking function, or what kinds of things come up inside, and there's no wrong answer. And so, yeah, it looks like a lot of people get excited, which is awesome. And then how about the question when someone says, tell me a little bit about yourself? Like, do you instantly know what you're going to say, or does sometimes your mind go blank? Yeah, sometimes I have a hard time where people will ask me literally on Monday, what did you do this weekend? And for the life of me, I can't even remember what I did. So I think sometimes, it's not so much the question being tough, it's more just how distracted are we? Okay, so definitely. Well, so I'm hoping everybody at this point has a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil or something handy. I do tend to do things a little bit old school. I know a lot of people use tablets and computers for everything these days, but I find value in actually using paper. So one of the questions that I had was, try to think back when you were a child, as young as you can remember, and what was your answer to the question of, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you can write that in the chat or put it on your paper. And so one of the observations that I was going to point out to you is that when I was reflecting on this, I remember when I was really young, this question to me was really fun. Like, just sort of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd say, I want to be a veterinarian. And in my mind, that really meant petting horses. But I didn't have a lot of stress. But then as I got older, the weight of the question kind of landed a little bit differently, right? Like, people, as you start to get into high school, they're asking you, what do you want to do? when you grow up and you're starting to connect the dots, right? That there's maybe more to this and you wish people would stop asking you that question. And the reason that I think it's important for us to talk about it is because when we're young, we start comparing ourselves, to that elusive ideal of whatever it is we're supposed to be when we grow up. And that feeling doesn't ever quite go away for a lot of us. But I'm just wondering, out of the group here today, how many of you actually became what you thought you were going to become? Sort of? No, not at all. Okay. Yeah, so it's mostly no. And so again, I think, it's just important for us to note that there may be some dissonance between what we thought when we were young and then sort of how things have turned out, like as we've grown up. And when people ask that question, what do you do? It has kind of a similar energy to what do you want to be when you grow up, right? Like there's just supposed to be a quick and direct answer to that, as if it isn't much more complicated. And so what we're going to do now with the piece of paper that you have is I'm going to time it and give you each a minute to write down an outline, basically, of all the jobs you've ever had. So for some people, that might only be 3 or 4, and for some of you, it might be 30. But just write down as much as you can in the course of a minute. And if you feel like you're done, then go back and add, volunteer positions or internships. So just keep working for 1 minute. So go ahead and start. All right, so that's a minute. Does anybody need more time? No? Okay. So we're just going to take a deep breath. And I want you to look at your list and think of one person. Remember one person out of all of those jobs that you've had in the past who made a big difference to you as a person. And just take a moment to send some gratitude from your heart center to that person. And then now we're just going to take 1 more minute. And next to all the things that you wrote that you did as far as the different positions that you had, I want you to take another moment to generate a list of skills and attributes that you gained along the way that make you who you are today. So they don't have to be in any particular order or aligned with the position or anything like that, but just take a minute or two to write down skills and attributes that you've gained along the way of this career trajectory that you've had. Okay. Does anybody need more time? All right, awesome. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard various truisms and so forth in sales about, that that people don't buy what you do, they kind of buy from you in the sense that they like you, they trust you. And this is kind of building on that in the sense that, at least for the exercise that we're talking about right now, what you do is less important than how you particularly do it. So one of the questions that I have for you to consider today is, all qualifications being equal, why should someone work with you versus someone else who does what you do? So if you look at the things that you've gained along the way in your career, some of those might be differentiators that you've noticed set you apart from other financial advisors or other project managers or legal advisors. So, and I also wanted to point out that these can actually be things that are a little bit serious, or they can be things like, I'm that person that always remembers to bring snacks. That really makes me different than, the other people that do what I do. So take a couple seconds to jot down at least 3 that you think will resonate with potential clients or employers. And ideally, they're based on real feedback that you've gotten from prior employers or coworkers or clients. So is there anyone who'd like to share what you see as your differentiators? And it would be helpful to me, since I don't know most of you, if you want to start by saying what it is you do, and then add what your differentiators are. Steve?
I've got a lot of experience, 50 years of experience in being a professional salesman. And I sell real estate for a living, but I have a very broad range of experience in a lot of different related areas, like finance, like mortgage lending, uh, oil and gas, stock market. So when people ask me about real estate, I can give them information about how real estate relates to other things and compare rates of return, compare risks, compare tax advantages and disadvantages to other areas.
Mm-hmm.
I have, I think I'm very calm. I've been married for 52 years. So I've figured out how to keep relationships long-term.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a very broad range of contacts in Albuquerque and people in my field, other realtors. I found out, for instance, that it takes more than one realtor to get a deal done most of the time. And that my ability to get a deal done, my ability to get a deal done is depending on those relationships. I'm sorry, I have to take a call.
Oh, okay,
See,
nice. Was there someone else that wanted to share your answer with the group? Kelly? Okay, oops. I guess you have to unmute yourself.
That's fine. I saw Priscilla's hand go up too, so no.
Oh, okay.
I was just gonna say, I think so I work with leadership. I do a lot of, my background is really mediation, and I think that's a differentiator for me. I've been doing it for 17 years, so I'm pretty comfortable with conflict, not always my own conflict, but certainly comfortable with other people's conflict, which is a huge differentiator because it just doesn't bother me. And I think that's a big thing. I also think through my different jobs that I've had, I have a pretty high level of self-care. I protect my time and my life in balance with my work and everything else that I do. And I think other people should be good at doing that because a lot of people aren't. And I think that differentiates me. And I think the mediation helped me. Comments that I've heard a lot from people are, I wish I could say that as clearly as you did, when talking about like needing to have a conversation that they're having a hard time with, and I'm kind of trying to help them get where they're needing to go. They're like, God, I wish I could say that as clearly as you did. So just those three things popped out when I did this list. And nice to meet you, by the way. We've been communicating to have this done, and I wanted to say a quick hello.
Oh, great. Yeah, nice to meet you too. Nice. And then Priscilla?
Hi, I help people buy and sell businesses and understand the value of their business. I've been doing that for the last decade. And I think that I'm differentiated by a couple of things, probably the most of which is being 70 some years old and having worked in many, many industries and many, many roles, doing many, many things. So I have a breadth of experience that I can bring to my work that some don't. I'm diligent, and so I'm kind of stick to stuff to try to get it done. And it's not about me, that it's about them and their business and their desire to buy and getting the deal done.
Awesome. Those are all really great. And one thing I want to build on, Steve and Kelly and Priscilla sharing these things, and we're obviously just doing rough draft, if you will. But I'm going to give you an example of something that I used to say when I had a business related to research projects, and I was often brought on, in a contract capacity. And when I did this exercise, it took me quite a while to go through it. And in the end, I came up with my 3 differentiators with all other qualifications being equal. The reason that you should hire me is because I bring hope, humor, and a sense of partnership to every contract. So essentially, a lot of the work we did was on very serious social issues that could feel very hopeless. And I tended to bring the hope back to the work. And then I also have just a crazy sense of humor. So when people are getting really stressed, I can, kind of help people get through that with some humor. And then with the partnership piece, that had to do with the fact that I really took on their work as my work. So it wasn't like I was just some contractor out there waiting for people to tell me what to do. I really learned, from soup to nuts, the whole nature of the project, and took it on with as much commitment as if it was my project, not just a contractor role. And so being able to articulate that in the course of an interview with a lot of clarity was something that really set me apart, quite honestly, from other candidates, even who had never sat down and thought to that degree, what have prior clients said about what they enjoy about working with me? Why do they keep hiring me? And what other bad experiences have they had, that I can learn from and make sure that I'm not, making those same mistakes. So, continue to refine what it is that you've jotted down. And part of the thing that I wanted to make sure that I communicated with you all today is a lot of times when you're networking, especially for those of us, like I think Priscilla was the one that says, I'd rather deflect the conversation, which I totally understand as an introvert. Can we just move on to the other person who's more excited to talk about themselves? But the key is to not think of introductions as primarily being about efficiency, like getting it over with as soon as possible. So I'm just going to say, I'm a realtor, or I specialize in, buying and selling businesses. Boom. It's not about efficiency. It's to encourage connection and curiosity, right? So when you meet someone and you ask them, well, what do you do? And if they pause for a second and they light up, it's intriguing, like, well, wow, what is it that they do that actually brightens their face when I ask that question? And don't just explain with your title what you do. Feel free to say perhaps a little bit more about it, like one more sentence, and then throw in something perhaps completely irrelated to what you do, and just say, and I'm also really passionate about hockey, like something that makes you less about what you do and more about who you are, so that they're intrigued to keep talking to you versus feeling like just because they've heard your job title, they know who you are, if that makes any sense. Does anyone else want to add to that idea, or something that you found that works well when you're introducing yourself to keep people engaged in conversation?
I was just going to make the comment that I really liked what you just said about your face lighting up when somebody asks you what you do. It's like being able to hear somebody smile on the phone. That's a real visceral feeling that when you light up talking about what you do, that's going to translate pretty much immediately. And I would put that in the same kind of category as hearing somebody smile over the phone, that you can just feel that that's happening. I will work on that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, and I think the other thing that relates a little bit to our culture's tendency to associate busyness with importance. A lot of times I worked, for 11 years at Presbyterian, and pretty much every time I asked anybody, how are you? Their answer was busy, which of course is not really an answer. But it's very much accepted, right? It's very normal. And so when I worked there, I had to really question, like, is that how I want to exist in the role that I have in this organization? Do I want to become one of the busy people? And I actually made a conscious decision and worked with a coach and, came up with like a whole reason why, like, that actually wasn't who I wanted to be. And so I was that person that if people asked, how are we doing? I would say, I'm doing good today. Like, is there anything I can do to help you? Which in that organization is very strange. It's akin to kind of saying, like, I don't have enough to do, which for a lot of people, is not something that they want to imply, because you think you're just going to get more work. But in my case, having a spirit of generosity really meant that I formed absolutely strong working relationships with people that I otherwise wouldn't have if I was just saying I'm busy. And it's a similar dynamic when someone asks you what you do, and instead of lighting up, you're like, oh, like, I'm so busy and overwhelmed, and I've been doing this for 10 years and there's just, it never lets up, or something. You see what I'm saying? Like the difference in the energy. So one of the other things that I learned from Seth Godin, who's a wonderful author, if you've never read any of his stuff, is that he basically said no one can ever write a job description to actually ask you to do what you're capable of doing. So what I often recommend to my clients is to write kind of a ghost job description. Like, what are the things that you can bring to this that no one ever trained you to do? No one ever asked you to do. It's not going to be part of how you're evaluated as far as, you know, your performance is concerned. But it could turn into some kind of passion project. It could turn into a differentiator in relation to how you do your work. But I remember reading that and letting go of this idea that somehow someone was going to see me and recognize all the potential that I had and create, you know, this perfect job for me. I realized that I could just start creating stuff and making things happen and not waiting for that, because all those other people are so busy that they're not really going to notice. And so anyway, things like that, I think, can make a huge difference. And the other thing that that I wanted to point out related to that outline of talking about your career experience since you started, a lot of times when I'm working with people, they sort of feel insecure or negative about the fact that their career might not have been linear. And so they can pause or just stop talking about themselves because they're like, oh, this isn't relevant, or I don't have as much experience as the next person in my field. But I think, like Steve pointed out and like Priscilla pointed out, if you have experience in other fields, that can actually connect you to your clients, and it can help you essentially do risk mitigation. It can help you connect dots that someone who's only worked in one field or only has one degree won't notice. So it's very important for you to own that. And I actually worked with a guy who's out in the Bay Area in the tech world. And essentially, a lot of people out there are looking for roles in like product development or product marketing, that kind of thing. And he actually had experience in 3 different realms. And rather than seeing that as a strength, he actually saw it as a detriment. And so in working together, he was able to see that for the right employer, that would be exactly what they need. They don't need another tunnel vision engineer. They need someone who's actually thought about the field of engineering, who have actually thought about where the products go once they're made, or where they come from. So really, the point, I guess, is to say that you can't necessarily change your history, but you can very, very much change the nature of the story that you tell when you're relating it to other people. And that all relates to essentially how you feel. So if you find yourself avoiding your past, that's going to increase the chances that you're just going to go through the motions when you're meeting somebody. And so part of the time today is to just encourage you to delve a little bit more deeply into that and understand that while your job history might have not gone A, B, C, D, like to the perfect, you know, corner suite, you have learned different things and made connections that are going to make you perfect for what you're doing now, if you allow it to essentially make sense inside of you. If that, I don't know if that's helpful, but it just seems to come up a lot where people doubt themselves in relation to not having that perfect career. And so I'm wondering just if there's any questions that have come up yet in people's minds as we're talking about this, or any other lessons that you've learned that you might want to share. Because it's definitely not just about me lecturing all of you. Let's try to see. Okay, I don't think anybody's raising their hand. I did want to share something that I made. Let's see if I can get my screen to be shared. Okay, can you all see my screen? It should have a heart on it. Okay, great. So basically, this is something that that I made back when I worked at Presbyterian, and part of what I encourage you to do is to take the differentiators and also to take maybe little things that you say to yourself to encourage yourself to show up as the best you, and create something like this. I mean, I actually worked with a graphic designer, but you could potentially do it in a little less complicated way. But honestly, I kept this at work, and it was something that reminded me that work is your practice, basically. It's an opportunity for you to look at how you show up, what you're insecure about, who triggers you and pushes your buttons, what types of excuses do you accept when it comes to not showing up with your best. And so some of the examples on here, for example, one of them is, I'm not waiting for anyone to ask me to do my best work, or for the system to make sense, or for anyone else to change. Working in a huge bureaucracy, it can be really tempting to just say to yourself, well, you know what, I'm just going to phone it in because this whole system is messed up. But what I started to realize was, you know, the system may never make sense, but it's up to me to figure out how I can show up. Because I really do believe that one person fully showing up can make all the difference in the world. So I'm going to stop sharing this, go back to the full screen. But I'm wondering, have any of you made such a, I call it a credo, or kind of like your guiding principles? Have you created something like this for yourself? Anybody?
No, but I think it's such a great idea. And there's so many different ways, you know, when you work with clients, especially in kind of what I do, to get people's creativity going with how they think about themselves. So being able to put something together that's non-linear, that they can, you know, just kind of think of things and write them down, I think is a good idea, especially if they need to remind themselves a lot of it, to have something around that they can do that with.
Yeah, and I've definitely done this with clients that I have that I'm working with now. And for some people, it, you know, who don't see themselves as creative people, it can be really tricky. But honestly, if people just start writing down sentences, it doesn't have to be pretty, at least not initially. But the idea is to get yourself out of your head and get some things down on paper that you can look at on a regular basis, that are near your computer. And actually, I'll show you guys really quick. My office is full of flip charts, like all the way around on all the walls, because I went through this whole lean manufacturing training, and this idea that your work should be visible. It should be obvious when someone walks into your workspace what your priorities are, what your values are, what you've accomplished. So part of what this does for me is keeps it very real and interactive in relation to the goals that I'm setting. They're not just in some computer file that I revisit like once a quarter. It's more visual and more interactive. And the way that this relates to kind of like your whole story of your career and who you are and why you're the best at what you do and people should choose you, is that the more you can keep your work engaging for yourself, the more you are likely to light up and kind of have some contagious enthusiasm or some interesting story to share that might be about a recent client success, or something like, I guess, an example of your values in action. And on that note, I'm wondering, how many of you have written down the values that you operate by, as far as, could be ethics, it could be, just values that you use to make decisions about who you work with, who you don't, how much you charge, what you do, what you don't do. How many of you have written down some kind of values or principles? Kelly? Mhm. Well, again, I want to encourage you to do that, because I think one of the kind of overarching ideas in business is often that there's some sort of standard way of doing it, and that you as a professional person should be available to anybody who wants to hire you. And whether you're an entrepreneur and you have your own business, or you're looking for an employer, I kind of just want to squash that idea and say, kind of to Kelly's point about mental health and taking care of yourself, you are not an ideal fit for every client who might want to hire you. But if you've never sat down and said, these are my values, I'm not going to take projects that, work at this kind of rhythm because I'm not willing to work like that, or if you've never written down your priorities and your values, it's going to be much more difficult for you to say no to the correct people. Does that make sense? Yeah, Marius?
Yeah, thank you. And nice to meet you, Marissa,
Nice to meet you
and
too.
everybody, really. I don't write these things down, but I pride myself of let's say, like a solid moral compass.
Mhm.
And I would say, like, for me, what's important is the mirror test. If I look in the mirror, can I tell myself you did okay or you did well? And I mean, I'm not perfect. I drop the ball on things, and it bugs me. But if in the grand scheme of things, I can look at myself and say, yeah, you've done all right. That kind of like guides a lot of what I do.
Mhm.
So I don't think and it changes, it develops. So I don't feel like I need to write it down and have it in my face. But it's kind of like in the back of my head at all times to some extent.
Mhm. All right, thanks for sharing that. Any other reflections? Yeah, Steve?
It's interesting because Priscilla called me right before this meeting to tell me why she thought we should turn down 2 significant sized pieces of business,
Mhm.
and the reasons why it just didn't make sense for us to work with these clients, that it was just going to lead to trouble, it wasn't going to work out, it was going to wind up in a lawsuit or a real problem.
You too.
It's the kind of thing that doesn't happen very often, that people don't turn down things that they see turning into a problem, having that potential. And Priscilla's wise enough to understand that this had that look to it. And so, we've mutually decided that this is probably not going to work for us. It will work on things that are the right thing for us instead of the wrong thing.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and that's huge, right? Because a lot of times things on the surface can seem like a very logical choice, right? Like, you have the skills, they want to hire you. What's the problem? But once you've learned to tune into your gut a little bit, and you recognize that there could be some problematic aspects to it, you have to have faith enough in yourself, right, to say, this is not a fit for me, right? And it could relate to the type of work they're asking you to do. It could be the timeline that they're asking you to do it in, or it could be the price, that they're not willing to pay you enough. But the clearer you are, about your values, your value proposition, valuing your own intuition and experience, then you can be more confident when it comes to those kinds of decisions. And I would argue, who you say no to is kind of akin to if someone asks you about your most recent failure and you have no idea what to say, it's just sort of an interesting thing, right? Like if you're never failing and you're never saying no, it kind of raises an eyebrow, at least in my case. Like it's sort of like, so you're perfect. Okay.
But Marissa, I have a question about that.
Sure.
Saying no, I don't think saying no is a failure. In fact, I
Oh,
think
no.
saying no is actually a positive thing.
Right, right. And I probably misspoke there. I was just saying that like one of the questions someone might ask you is like, explain to me a failure that you've had in your career and what you learned from it. So that's over there. And then someone else might ask you, like, tell me about the characteristics of a client that you've said no to. And if to those separate questions you don't have any answers, then that probably means that the way that you're operating is, you know, basically you're not taking enough risks, or you're not clear on when you should say no to people, because the odds are that you should have said no to at least someone at some point. And you should have failed at some point.
Right.
So yeah, they were sort of separate, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, so let's see, any other questions? Because I know we're sort of winding down on time. Yeah, Steve?
I would say that I definitely don't trust my intuition well enough, often enough. But my intuition tells me to always have female partners who do trust their intuition and to listen to them.
Well, I think that's a great point, because honestly, one of the things I was just talking to a business owner about today is that difficulty of recognizing what you're not good at and being able to say, I should not be doing this, whether it's because I'm not competent or just because I hate it. I need other people, right? Whether they're staff or they're contractors or partners. And I meet so many people that are just trying to do everything on their own. And that actually impacts your ability to serve clients and to love what you do. So I think that those are really important. And the other thing I'll just share with you about going back to the values piece is that I've set up my business in a way that every client that I get, 10% of what I make goes directly and immediately to a community organization in Albuquerque that is serving people at the lower end of the economic spectrum that are trying to move up in their jobs or trying to overcome addiction or what have you. And I literally put it on my website, you know, that I support social justice and equity and diversity and inclusion and so forth. And for me, that was quite a big step, right? To put that out there and to say, these are the things that I stand for. And what I realized was I would rather do that and have people self-select away from me if those, you know, values don't resonate with them, versus getting further along in a process with someone and recognizing that we're really not a good fit for whatever reason. And so I would encourage you all to think, you know, is there anything that you can think about that you would actually want to take a stand and put it out there and say, I stand for this, or I believe in this, or my business donates to this cause. Because at the very least, it's going to allow people to understand a little bit more about who you are and what you care about. But then on the other side, it could also, like I say, self-select some clients away that might not be aligned with the vision that you have for the work that you're doing and why you're doing it. So doing these types of reflections about who you are, what lessons you've learned along the way, and the characteristics that you have and what differentiates you from other people that do the same work. It also relates to who would you say no to, why, what kind of partnerships really help build you up to balance out things that you don't do well. And just thinking about things that you care about and how your business efforts can actually support those things. Because the clearer you are about this, the clearer somebody who's talking to you is going to be when they are trying to assess whether they want to learn more about who you are and what you do. So, you know, basically that was the whole workshop, so to speak. And often when I do this type of work with clients, some of the things that we've done today in just a couple minutes, we do deeper versions that can take weeks to complete. And because what I've learned is sometimes if people are dealing with resistance in themselves about their self-esteem or their confidence, it can take some time for those issues to resolve. It's not as simple as just kind of making a list. But I thought it would be helpful to at least do a mini version of those exercises. Yeah. Kelly?
Nothing. I was just putting some back over there, but
Oh,
I really
sorry.
enjoyed that. I got a lot out of it, and I feel like I have a couple of things that were really powerful for me that I feel like I'll be thinking about for a while. So I really appreciate it and enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Marissa. We really appreciate you giving this presentation. If there are no other questions or comments, we'll wrap this up, and everyone know that the recording for this will be placed on the Trusted Advisor Network website once Jim gets a hold of it and edits out all the stuff at the beginning that shouldn't be in the recording. So when we're all introducing each other and saying hello. But that takes a couple of weeks, I would think, unless Jim gets really motivated because he's got other things to do as well. So look for that. He will also send that link out to everyone who registered, whether they were here or not. So even people who weren't able to attend or had to leave early will get this link as well.
Well, and I'll just put this slide up at the end here just to
Perfect.
In case anybody wants to connect on LinkedIn or visit my website. And I just wanted to explain that if people are thinking about working with me, I do a discovery call for $150, which includes resume review and LinkedIn review, and that can be credited towards a package. And I've also been tapped recently as kind of a business mentor for entrepreneurs that are looking at their business and trying to make some decisions about their brand. So I'm happy to talk with folks about that as well. But I'm really honored to have had the chance to get to know some of you and spend this time together today.
Great. Wonderful. Again, thank you, Marissa. Thanks everyone for attending. We really appreciate it, and we will see you at another meeting. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very
Marissa.
much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.